It begins with a mirror that doesn't simply reflect the face staring back, but the soul behind the eyes. In 1988, Michael Jackson stood before millions, delivering a song that wasn't just a hit. It was a confession, a sermon, a revolution. Man in the Mirror, a ballad so powerful that even decades later, it feels less like a pop record and more like a prayer. But hidden beneath the soaring choir, beneath the trembling emotion of Michael's voice, lies a secret almost no one talks about. A single change. Just one word, not a verse rewritten, not a melody reshaped. Just one word, and yet that word carried the weight of Michael's struggle, his perfectionism, his relentless pursuit of meaning. It was a word that turned the song from a good message into an eternal one. Think about that for a moment. The king of pop. A man who obsessed over every beat, every breath, every dance step, pausing over one word, circling it, wrestling with it, until he made the choice that would change not only the song, but the way we understood him. Because Man in the Mirror is not just about change. It is about accountability, responsibility, looking into the eyes, staring back at you and realizing the truth can't be hidden, even from yourself. Now imagine if that truth hinged on a single syllable. This isn't the kind of story you'll find in glossy biographies or fan magazines. This is the kind of story that reveals itself slowly, like a whisper in the dark, a glimpse into the way Michael's mind worked when the world wasn't watching. So the question is, what was that word? Why did Michael stop the music, rewrite the lyric, and insist on singing it differently than the writers had intended? That answer lies in the shadows of his life at that moment. A man at the height of fame, but also at the edge of emptiness. The one thing he couldn't escape was the truth staring back at him. This is the story of how Michael Jackson changed one word in Man in the Mirror, and how it changed everything, because sometimes greatness doesn't depend on grand gestures. Sometimes it lives in the smallest choices, the ones we almost overlook. And if Michael could transform the world with one word, what might happen if we did the same? But before we reveal what that word was and why it mattered so deeply, we have to go back to where it all began, to a song Michael didn't even write, but one he would come to make entirely his own. And once you hear the origin, you'll understand why the king of pop couldn't let it stand as it was. Every great story begins before the star steps on stage. Man in the Mirror was no different. The year was 1987. Songwriters Glenn Ballard and Siedah Garrett were experimenting in the studio. They weren't trying to reinvent pop music. They were simply chasing an idea. A song that asked a simple, piercing question. What if change didn't start with politics, or revolutions, or protests in the streets? But with you, Garrett scribbled down lines about hunger, about broken streets, about indifference. But at the heart of the draft was a challenge. Look at yourself first. The song became a mirror held up to the listener. Quincy Jones, Michael's legendary producer, knew the moment he heard it. This is the one. It had the bones of something timeless, the kind of record that could stop people in their tracks. But at this stage, it wasn't Michael's. Not yet. The lyrics were complete enough to sing, the melody powerful enough to catch fire. Any artist could have taken it and delivered something moving. And that's what makes what happened next so extraordinary. Because when Michael read the words for the first time, he didn't just hear a message, he heard himself. His own private contradictions, his own hunger for meaning, his own unspoken guilt. It's easy to forget. By 1987, Michael wasn't just a superstar. He was an empire. Thriller had shattered every record imaginable. Crowds screamed his name louder than any world leaders. He could have recorded any song, any genre, and it would have sold millions. But Michael wasn't chasing sales. Not this time. He was chasing something deeper, a way to speak to the world's pain while also wrestling with his own. And so he sat with the lyrics of Man in the Mirror. Line by line, word by word, and then he stopped. On one line, his finger traced a word that didn't sit right. It was fine. It worked. It fit the rhyme, carried the meaning, and would have been sung by anyone else without question. But Michael Jackson was not anyone else. This was the beginning of the battle over a single word. To understand why Michael changed that word, We have to step into his life at the moment he first saw it. The year was 1987. Michael had just released Bad, the long-awaited follow-up to Thriller. On the surface, everything was perfect. He was the most famous man alive. His videos played on every screen. His concerts sold out in minutes. But inside, Michael was restless. The Bad era was darker than Thriller. The songs weren't just about love or fun. They were about defiance, violence, guilt, and escape. Michael was beginning to show the cracks in his heart. The loneliness of fame. The weight of being idolized but not truly known. In interviews, he spoke of wanting to help children, to heal the world. But those weren't just polished PR lines. He had begun to feel the suffering he saw on tour. The hungry crowds in poor countries. The chaos of cities divided by poverty. He was asking himself, what is all this fame for if I can't use it to make a difference? So when Man in the Mirror landed in his hands, it wasn't just another track for the album. It was a chance. But Michael was also haunted by doubt. He knew critics dismissed him as just an entertainer, a singer of pop fluff. Could he really deliver a song that demanded change and be taken seriously? As he rehearsed the lines, he stumbled, not over the melody, but over the meaning. The lyric was pointing outward, toward the world, toward injustice. And yet Michael felt it had to point inward, too. To the man singing it, to the man everyone was watching, he circled one word. He whispered it differently. He crossed it out, replaced it, and sang again. Because Michael wasn't just searching for the right lyric. He was searching for truth. His truth. He knew millions would sing this song. He knew it would become a chorus for people demanding change. But if he sang it the wrong way, with the wrong word, the message wouldn't land. It would sound like preaching, not confession, and Michael Jackson wasn't here to preach. He was here to bare his soul. That's why one word mattered more than the rest. Because hidden inside that single word was the key to turning Man in the Mirror from a message about change into a cry for change. And Michael understood, perhaps better than anyone, that cries echo louder when they come from the mirror itself. But what was the word? And why did Michael believe the song could not exist without changing it? The answer takes us deeper, into his perfectionism, his obsession, and the moment in the studio where everything shifted. And that's where the story truly begins. The lyric sheet lay before him. Crisp white paper, black ink, the blueprint of a song destined for greatness. Michael's eyes scanned it with intensity. To most people, these words already sang with power. They spoke of hunger, of sorrow, of people shivering in the cold. They called for compassion, for change, for action. But Michael was not most people. Every syllable was a note in a symphony only he could hear. Every word carried the burden of truth or the poison of falsehood. He treated lyrics the way a sculptor treats marble. Every strike of the chisel mattered. As he whispered the lines aloud, his voice echoing soft against the studio walls, he stopped. There it was. The line, it wasn't broken. It wasn't wrong. In fact, it worked. It carried rhythm. It carried logic. It made sense, and yet something about it rang hollow. Michael underlined the word. He circled it. He tilted his head and read the line again. He sang it softly. He pressed the pencil to the page, replaced it with another word, and sang again. Still, it wasn't right. For minutes, maybe hours, Michael wrestled with this single detail. To outsiders, it would seem absurd. An entire album to finish, deadlines pressing, a global audience waiting. And he was hung up on a solitary word. But this was Michael Jackson. He had built his career on the kind of microscopic attention to detail most people would never even notice. He knew that the difference between and ah could change the feel of a chorus, that a single breath in the wrong place could collapse an entire performance. And here, in Man in the Mirror, he found the most dangerous kind of lyric, one that sounded fine, but didn't feel true. Michael knew the audience wouldn't consciously notice the difference. They would sing it the way he sang it. They would accept the word, whatever it was. But if he chose wrong, they would feel the lie. Even if they couldn't explain why, the word as written made the song a statement, a declaration, almost like the singer was pointing outward at the world, demanding it listen. But Michael didn't want a declaration. He wanted confession. He wanted vulnerability. He wanted the sound of a man turning the knife inward, admitting his own guilt. He wasn't satisfied with a song that pointed fingers. He wanted one that turned the finger back on himself, and that was why this word couldn't stay. The lyric on the page was correct. But it wasn't honest, and honesty mattered more than correctness. So Michael leaned over, pressed the pencil down hard, and made the change. One word erased. One word written in its place. The word that turned Man in the Mirror into the anthem we know today. And once that choice was made, there was no going back. But why did it matter so much? Why would Michael, in the midst of fame, pressure, and deadlines, stop everything for one syllable? The answer lies in who Michael was, not just as a singer, but as a seeker. A man who believed art was sacred, that words had power, and that even the smallest detail could carry the weight of the world. This wasn't about music anymore. This was about Michael's soul, and the closer we look, the more we see. He wasn't just fighting over a lyric. He was fighting over the truth of who he was. To understand why Michael fought for that word, you have to understand how he thought. Michael Jackson didn't just sing songs. He lived them. He consumed them until they became part of his bloodstream. To him, a lyric was not ink on a page. It was a living force. It was a contract with the world. Every time he stepped to a microphone, Michael knew he was making a promise, that what he sang would be real, that it would mean something, that it would carry weight. He had been trained from childhood to obsess over details. The Jackson 5 rehearsals weren't casual jam sessions, they were boot camps. His father demanded precision. Every note, every move, every harmony had to be perfect. If it wasn't, there were consequences. That perfectionism never left him. It evolved. It deepened. It became a relentless pursuit of truth in art. Listen to his catalog, and you'll hear it everywhere. Think of Smooth Criminal, where the seemingly nonsense phrase, "Annie, are you okay?" became an unforgettable hook that anchored the entire song. Think of Billie Jean, where the subtle shift between "the kid is not my son" and the aching emphasis on "my" told a story of denial and desperation in just a breath. Michael knew words mattered. He knew that a lyric wasn't just sound, it was meaning, and in Man in the Mirror, the stakes were higher than ever. This was not a love song. Not a dance track, not a tale of danger or seduction. This was a manifesto. A call to action, a cry for accountability. Michael understood that people would carry this song into their lives, that it would be sung in protests, in churches, in quiet moments of reflection, that children and adults alike would take its message as gospel. How could he risk one word dulling the blade of truth? The word as written made the song sound like advice, like a teacher standing before a class, pointing at them, telling them what they should do. But Michael didn't want to sound like a teacher. He wanted to sound like a man broken open by his own flaws, a man who looked into the mirror and saw both beauty and shame, a man pleading not with the world, but with himself. And so, with one substitution, he transformed the entire song. It shifted from instruction to confession, from lecture to testimony. This is why one word mattered, because that single change altered the lens through which the world heard the song. It turned the audience from passive listeners into active participants. Suddenly, they weren't being told what to do. They were being shown what it feels like to wrestle with responsibility. It was genius. It was spiritual. It was Michael Jackson at his most powerful. And yet, this decision reveals something more haunting about him. Michael was always searching, always reaching for authenticity, even as his life was built on spectacle and illusion. He wore masks, but in his music he ripped them away. That one word became his way of whispering to the world, "I'm not untouchable. I'm not above this. I'm in the mirror, too." That's why the recording sessions became so intense. Why he sang the line with such fire that even hardened studio veterans felt chills. He wasn't just performing a lyric. He was embodying it. Michael Jackson had found the word that turned the spotlight back on himself. And yet, that choice came with its own burden. Because once you tell the world you are the man in the mirror, you can never run from the reflection. And for Michael Jackson, That reflection would become both his greatest triumph and his greatest torment. The word had been changed. The song was alive. But as the choir swelled and the record spun, Michael was about to discover that the world doesn't just listen to truth, it demands it. And one day, that mirror would ask him questions he could not answer. To understand why Man in the Mirror carried so much weight for Michael, you have to step back and look at the world in the late 1980s. The decade was burning with contradictions. On one hand, there was glitter, excess, neon lights, and the illusion of prosperity. But beneath the surface, the world was bleeding. In Africa, famine stole lives by the millions. Televised images of starving children shook the conscience of entire nations, but too often, compassion was fleeting. In America, homelessness was rising. Skid Row in Los Angeles was swelling with tents, cardboard boxes, and the forgotten faces of poverty. The City of Angels had a shadow side that the cameras rarely showed. Around the globe, apartheid in South Africa painted a stark picture of injustice. Protesters filled the streets, demanding freedom, demanding dignity. Nelson Mandela remained behind bars, a living symbol of the cost of oppression. The Cold War loomed like a storm cloud. Nuclear fears whispered in classrooms, headlines, and late-night broadcasts. One wrong move and the world could be reduced to ashes, and Michael Jackson saw it all. He was no longer just a performer traveling city to city. He was a witness. His tours took him across continents, into places where fans screamed his name with joy, and then faded into the quiet suffering of lives untouched by fame, fortune, or even basic survival. He met children with no shoes, who looked up at him as though he were an angel. He shook hands with leaders who spoke of change but delivered none. He saw contradictions everywhere, adoration in the spotlight, despair in the shadows. It unsettled him. It haunted him, because here was the question that gnawed at his heart. What good is being the most famous man alive if all it does is shine a light on yourself? Michael wanted that light redirected. He wanted it cast on the forgotten, the broken, the voiceless. And yet, he also knew the truth. Real change could not begin with governments, with policies, with charity drives alone. It had to begin inside. In the private moment when a human being stares into the glass and whispers, "I need to change." That was why Man in the Mirror mattered so much. It wasn't just a song. It was a philosophy. A reminder that revolutions don't begin in the streets. They begin in the soul. But here's the irony. While Michael was determined to deliver that message to the world, he was also struggling with it himself. The one word he changed was not only about them. It was about him. He was the superstar who had everything yet felt hollow. He was the idol millions adored yet felt deeply isolated. He was the man who wanted to change the world but first had to face his own reflection. And that's why this single word became a lifeline for the world. And for Michael Jackson himself. But finding the word was only half the battle. Now came the moment that would decide whether the song lived or died. Recording it. And when Michael stepped into the booth, carrying that word in his chest, what happened next would shake everyone in the studio. The studio was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that feels like a storm gathering. Engineers adjusted dials. Quincy Jones sat with his unshakable composure. Sida Garrett, who had written the song, leaned forward, nervous and excited. And then Michael walked in. He wasn't just there to sing. He was there to pour out a piece of himself he rarely let anyone see. Recording Man in the Mirror was unlike anything else he had done. This wasn't Billie Jean with its pulsing groove and mysterious swagger. It wasn't Beat It with its fiery defiance. This was a plea, a cry, a surrender. The red light clicked on. The track rolled. Michael closed his eyes. He sang the opening lines, soft and trembling. His voice was fragile, almost hesitant, like a man approaching his own reflection for the first time. Then the chorus arrived. The line with the word, the line he had fought for. He leaned into it, gripping the microphone stand as though it were the only thing holding him steady. When he delivered that word, the changed word, it didn't sound like a lyric. It sounded like an admission. like Michael Jackson himself was standing trial before the world, and the only witness was the mirror in front of him. The control room froze. No one moved. No one spoke, and then Michael stopped. His head bowed. His shoulders shook. He couldn't go on. For a moment, Quincy Jones thought they might have to cut the session. Michael wasn't just singing, he was breaking. The word he had chosen pierced him as much as it pierced the song. But then slowly, Michael lifted his head. He wiped his face. He stepped back to the microphone, and he sang it again. Stronger this time, more raw. Each take grew more powerful until the air in the studio felt electric. People watching had goosebumps. Some whispered later that they felt like they were in a church, that Michael wasn't just recording, he was testifying. Because Michael didn't just sing the lyric, he believed it. He became it, and then in one of the takes, something happened that changed the session forever. Michael clenched his fist, threw back his head, and delivered the line with a force that shook the room. The word echoed through the speakers, tearing through the silence, filling every corner of the studio with conviction. That was the take they kept. The word was sealed into history. What the public would one day hear was not just Michael Jackson, the pop star. It was Michael Jackson, the man, facing himself, trembling, confessing, demanding, pleading, and it all hinged on that single choice he had made on the lyric sheet. When the recording ended, the room was silent again, but this time it was awe. People looked at each other, eyes wide, as if they had just witnessed something holy, and in a way they had, because Michael Jackson didn't just record Man in the Mirror. He bled it, he lived it. He carved his own struggle into every syllable. And yet, as the track was finished and polished, no one outside that room truly understood the cost. They would hear the song, sing along, and be inspired, but they wouldn't know the war that had been fought inside Michael just to sing it honestly. The word had been chosen. The record was done, but the question remained. Would the world hear the truth behind it? The release was approaching. Millions would soon press play. But would they grasp that behind the anthem lay a confession, one word heavy enough to carry the weight of Michael's heart? The answer would come when the song finally reached the world. When Michael returned to the booth after his raw and broken takes, Quincy Jones knew the song still needed one more dimension. Something to transform it from a personal confession into a collective cry. That's when the choir arrived. Andre Crouch, legendary gospel leader, brought in his ensemble, voices steeped in faith, in struggle, in the tradition of lifting sorrow and turning it into fire. They were not background singers. They were a force of nature. Michael stood silently as they gathered, watching them take their places. He knew this wasn't just another session. This was about spirit. This was about transcendence. The track played. The choir's voices rose, and suddenly, Man in the Mirror became something bigger than Michael himself. The solo verses carried the weight of one man staring into his reflection. But the choir answered like a congregation. You are not alone. We are all in this together. Every syllable Michael sang was now multiplied by dozens of voices, each one carrying centuries of pain, hope, and triumph. The word he had changed, the word that transformed the lyric from lecture to confession, was now lifted by voices that turned it into a sermon. Not just Michael's cry, but humanity's cry, and in that moment, something clicked. The engineers in the studio would later say that when the choir swelled behind Michael, the energy in the room became indescribable. Some swore it felt like a revival, like church in the purest sense, where the walls shake, the air trembles, and the human voice becomes more than sound. Michael fed off it. Each take pushed him further, his voice straining, trembling, breaking, yet never faltering. He was no longer just singing, he was pleading, and the choir carried him higher each time he fell. Quincy, with his unerring instinct, knew the track had found its final form. Not polished, not clean, but alive. And when Michael reached that line, and that line with the altered word, the choir didn't just echo it. They thundered it. They turned it into a call. Now it wasn't just one man in the mirror. It was every voice, every listener, every soul confronted with the same truth. That's the genius of what Michael created, a personal plea magnified into a universal anthem. But here's the thing. The public wouldn't know. They'd hear the passion, they'd feel the power, but they wouldn't realize that the heartbeat of the song came down to a choice Michael made with a pencil on a lyric sheet. They would think the choir made the song soar. They would think the production elevated it. And yes, those things mattered. But without that word, the song would have floated. With it, the song burned. The session ended with exhausted smiles, teary eyes, and a silence that felt like reverence. Everyone in that room knew something historic had been born. But they also knew something else. No matter how powerful it felt in that studio, the real test would come when the world heard it. And the world was about to be shaken. January 1988. The single was released. Man in the Mirror stepped out of the studio shadows and into the light of radios, record stores, and televisions across the globe. At first, there was quiet curiosity. Critics noted the shift in tone from Michael's usual hits. Less about beats and hooks, more about message. Some wondered if the king of pop had gone too far into the realm of seriousness. But then the song began to spread. It wasn't a slow build. It was an eruption. Audiences didn't just like Man in the Mirror. They felt it. People wrote in letters saying it moved them to tears. Churches adopted it into sermons. Activists played it at rallies. Families sang it together in living rooms. And every time Michael hit that word, the one he had chosen, the one he had insisted upon, people felt the difference. Even if they couldn't explain why, because the song didn't sound like preaching. It sounded like surrender. It didn't sound like a lecture. It sounded like testimony. Radio stations reported unusual reactions. Listeners calling in, saying they had to pull over their cars because the song made them weep. Teachers used it in classrooms. Volunteers played it while handing out food in shelters. It climbed the charts. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was that it climbed into people's lives, and for Michael, that was everything. When he performed the song live, the reaction was electric. Crowds of tens of thousands sang along, their voices rising with his. But when he reached the line, the one he had rewritten, something different happened. It wasn't just cheering. It wasn't just noise. It was resonance. A shared breath, a shared ache, a shared cry. Michael felt it. He felt the truth of his choice vibrating in the bodies of thousands. And for once, he wasn't just the star on stage. He was the man in the mirror, standing alongside them. But there's a tragic irony here. Because as the song became a global call for change, Michael himself was still struggling with the same mirror, the same reflection, the same questions that had haunted him in the studio. Did he live up to it? Did he embody the word he had chosen? Or did the world demand from him a perfection he could never meet? That tension would follow him for the rest of his life. The song soared higher than he ever imagined, but the mirror never let him go. And that's the cliff edge of this story. While millions found hope in Man in the Mirror, Michael carried the heavier burden, the knowledge that the word he had changed bound him to the truth forever. He could never escape it. And soon, the world would begin to question if even Michael Jackson could truly live up to the power of the word he had chosen. For months, fans devoured Man in the Mirror. They sang it. They wept to it. They believed it. But almost no one realized the quiet act of rebellion, the one-word switch that made it all work. The original lyric, written by Glenn Ballard and Sieta Garrett, carried the same melody, the same structure, the same message. But there was one moment in the song where the tone shifted. The line as written asked the listener to make that change from a position of command, almost like an order, almost like a directive to the world. But Michael hesitated. He circled the word. He shook his head, because if he sang it that way, he would sound like a preacher lecturing from a pulpit. He would sound above the crowd, not among them. He would sound like he was telling people what to do instead of showing them who he was. So in the quiet of the studio, Michael rewrote the line. He didn't just soften it, he internalized it. Instead of a command, he turned it into a confession. Instead of you, he made it me. He wasn't singing at you. He was singing with you, and here it is, the word that changed everything. Michael replaced the directive with myself. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. It seems small, doesn't it? Just a pronoun. Just one word, but listen carefully. That one word transformed the song from a sermon into a revelation. With myself, Michael admitted vulnerability. He stripped away the mask of the untouchable superstar. He was no longer pointing fingers. He was exposing his own struggle, and that honesty disarmed everyone. Critics, fans, strangers, they didn't feel scolded. They felt understood. They weren't being told to act. They were being invited into Michael's mirror. That's the genius. That's why people cried when they heard it. That's why the song became timeless. Because Michael Jackson, the man who seemed larger than life, admitted with a single word that he was just like everyone else. Broken, searching, hoping, desperate to change. That word turned a pop hit into a prayer. But here's the dark edge. Once you confess, once you bare yourself to the mirror, you can't run from it again. And for Michael, that single word would haunt him forever, because the question lingered. Did Michael Jackson change himself? Did he live up to the mirror's demand? That haunting question would become the core of his life, his legacy, and his tragedy. And the answer is not simple. As the years passed, Man in the Mirror became one of Michael's signature songs. He performed it across continents in front of millions. Crowds erupted with tears and chants, but every time he sang that word, myself, something flickered behind his eyes, because mirrors never lie. And Michael's reflection was becoming harder to face. He wanted to embody the song's message. He gave to charities, raised awareness, stood with orphans, marched with the vulnerable. He poured millions into humanitarian causes. On the surface, he was living the lyric, but inside, the mirror kept cracking. Whispers of his struggles grew louder. His battles with appearance, his loneliness, his scandals, the relentless pressure of fame. Every time the public questioned him, the word came back to haunt him. Myself. Was he really changing? Or was he unraveling? The world, of course, wanted a simple story. They wanted Michael Jackson to be the prophet of change, the man who practiced what he sang. But human lives are never simple. And here is where the song became prophecy. Because the mirror is cruel. It reflects everything, the beauty and the flaws, the victories and the wounds. Michael had offered the world a confession, but the world demanded proof. They wanted the perfect reflection. They wanted him to embody myself flawlessly, and that was impossible. In his final years, when he stood on stage and sang Man in the Mirror, his voice cracked differently. Not just with passion, with exhaustion. The choir still rose behind him, the audience still wept, but Michael's own reflection seemed to be crumbling. That is the tragedy of the song. It gave millions hope. But for Michael, it became a haunting. He had taken a word, turned it into a revelation, and in doing so, chained himself to its truth forever. And the final irony? Even as the world judged him, doubted him, celebrated him, condemned him, they all kept singing the song. They all kept chanting the word he had chosen. They all kept facing their own mirrors because Michael Jackson had dared to face his. In the end, the mirror shattered, not because the song failed, but because Michael was human. And maybe that was the lesson all along. Man in the Mirror isn't just another Michael Jackson song. It's the rare track where pop stardom collided with raw humanity. Think about it. The king of pop, a man idolized across the globe, could have kept his distance. He could have sung from the throne, pointing outward, demanding the world to change. But he didn't. He looked inward. He sang one word differently. He replaced the directive with the confession. And by doing so, he gave us permission to do the same. That's why the song still resonates decades later. That's why it's played at memorials, at marches, at vigils, at celebrations. It's not just about the world. It's about you. It's about me. It's about the terrifying, liberating truth that the only way the world changes is when we do. Michael Jackson never escaped his mirror. None of us do. But maybe that's the point. Because the mirror isn't just about shame. It's about possibility. Every time we look at it, we see not just what we are, but what we could be. That's the legacy Michael left us. Not perfection, not easy answers, but the courage to sing a single word, myself, and mean it. So tonight, as you think about Michael Jackson, as you think about the song, ask yourself the same question he did in that studio, with the choir roaring behind him and the pencil still fresh on the lyric sheet. When you face the man in the mirror, will you make the change? Because in the end, it isn't about Michael at all. It's about us, and that is why one word, one small, quiet word, changed everything.